read with Jenna Book Club selection. She is currently adapting it for TV and working on her second novel. Kehinde has lived in Singapore for over 10 years, where she has taught English, drama, and English as an additional language. She is passionate about art, literature, and music, especially from West Africa and the diaspora. So join me in welcoming her this evening. Woo! Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think the first thing we're going to do is read a little bit from your book. So do you have a...
Can I have your copy?
Yeah, you can have my copy.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to read from the 4th chapter of the book. The book doesn't actually have chapter numbers. It has names. So it follows 3 characters and they're alternating perspectives. So this is Dara, a lawyer, and it's her 2nd chapter. This chick's place is insano, Amaka whistled as the kitchen door swung behind and Dara. Are you sure it's okay for us to help ourselves? I don't think she'll mind. Dara was almost blinded by the whiteness of the curved room, the cupboards, fridge, and floor. Even the appliances were white. It was like being inside a coconut. Can you see the kettle? Oh, here. Amaka put her glass of wine down and extracted something from the white wall. Damn, this Google money must be good. I heard the Singapore office has its own train station. I have no idea, but can we not talk about this? She could walk in at any time. Dara hunted through the cupboards for the tea. How are you feeling? 1 week to go. Dara blew out the sour frustration that had been building all day. The news couldn't have spread faster if Hermes had announced it himself. Some of the other lawyers had appeared sympathetic, though they were careful not to say too much. The sirens had done a terrible job of hiding their delight. Like the petty creatures they were thrilled that an unexpected sea monster had wrapped its tentacles around her boat and slowed her progress. Ian's acting like nothing's changed. It's been the most crazy-making week, having to pretend everyone isn't gossiping behind my back. And the most galling part is that I still have to work just as hard. He's been piling even more on my plate, like he's trying to prove it's too much for me to handle. What have you found out about Lanny? Amaka filled the kettle. Nothing. Dara found some Earl Grey. Absolutely nothing. His Instagram's private and he doesn't have a Facebook page. Some pictures popped up on an image search. I can't be completely sure it's him, but I think it is. Holiday pics with some friends. A girlfriend, maybe. White girl? Of course. Dara sniffed a carton of milk from the fridge and poured some into her mug. Amaka took an ice tray out of the freezer and turned 2 blocks into her glass, so we wait and see. Dara tidied everything away before turning back to the living room. We wait and see. 4 other members of the book club were spread out across the armchairs and sofa. They were helping themselves to a tray of popcorn and tortilla chips, sharing photos from their Christmas holiday. A carrot cake and a cake keeper bided its time in the center of the table, and 3 half-empty wine bottles cooled in a bucket. As Dara and Amaka settled onto the divan, Dara followed the threads of the group's different conversations, piecing together what she knew about them so far. Nana, a British Ghanaian child psychologist, sat with her knees hugged close to her chest so that she folded over herself like an abstract figurine. With a pashmina draped over her shoulders, she exuded a floaty calmness reminiscent of yoga and ginger oil. Yemisi was an older Nigerian mum whose large breasts bounced against the strained keyhole of her silk halter neck. Every other sentence was about her husband or sons. As the 2 women chatted, Dara realized they were the 2 sides of moneyed Africa that made their way across the ocean. Nana was dusty red roads and crumbling airports filtered through the glossy pages of architectural coffee table books. Yemisi was the Africa of excess, a bulky Celine bag and long Peruvian weave that hung like 2 curtains separated by the shiny railing of her faux scalp. Latoya chatted with Kike Ibusung, the only other woman Dara had met before today. The daughter of a Nigerian state governor and former chairman of the National Bank, Kike's wealth was rumored to be astronomical, but in her simple white polo shirt and white denim shorts, there was no evidence of this. She didn't even have a handbag tonight. In fact, the only telltale signs of her money were her cut glass accent and her long straight ponytail, all her own, and impeccable skin. A stay-at-home mum, Kike had always been friendly when they ran into each other at events, but Dara noticed that she was rarely with her husband Bayo and was never particularly eager to talk about her two young boys. Wait, you get your hair products delivered to Singapore for free? Yemisi interrupted Latoya, overhearing her exchange with Kike. We pay postage, but it's US prices, not international, Latoya said smugly. Perks of the job. Latoya works for the US Navy, Nana explained, catching Dara's eye. Oh, cool. Dara cupped her mug. How long have you lived here? 5 years. My kids are all grown. My son's in college and my daughter's finishing her final year of IB, so Singapore is awesome. I feel like I'm in my 20s again. Yemisi wrinkled her nose and shook her head. I don't think I want my boys growing up here past 10. It's too disconnected from the real world. Last week we went to the cinema and this kid, he couldn't have been more than 13, turned around to shush the woman behind him. If that had happened in some parts of London, he would have been slapped or worse. Are you kidding me? Latoya scoffed. My kids have grown up without the weight of being black in America. They've had a childhood. It's worth it. Apart from the damn internet, you know they're safe here and that it's worth its price in gold. Back in Atlanta, we were up to no good as teenagers, drag racing every night. The worst they can get up to here is sniffing glue. I don't know. I've heard some funny stories from the parents in our school. I think they're doing a lot more than glue, Kika said. Now it's prescription and they get it from their parents. You see, Yemisi cried out, I'm telling you. Yemisi, this happens everywhere. Amaka rolled her eyes. Or do people not take drugs to escape their problems in Nigeria? What problems? What problems have they got here? Latoya protested. Are you serious? Everyone has problems, Amaka shot back. I mean, it's all relative, Kika said to no one in particular. Just because you're cocooned in a bubble, Amaka teased. I've earned the right to my cocoon, Latoya shouted, and the women laughed. Nana held her hands up and leaned forward like a referee. Ladies, we need to start or we'll be here all night. Let's vote before we get too tipsy to know what we're doing. We get the vote out of the way before we start our discussion. This last sentence was directed at Dara, who made an agreeable expression in response. What about Lillian? Amaka said suddenly. Isn't she coming? Latoya turned her head to look into the hallway. She's been gone a long time. Should we check on her? The others shrugged or reached for another handful of chips. Kike uncovered the cake, revealing the cream frosting sprinkled with chopped pecans. We're going to need this. She started to slice. My helper Annie's carrot cake is incredible. Yemisi took the first plate. I don't know how you stay so slim. I need the bathroom. I could see if she's all right, Dara offered, figuring she could plant the seed of an upset stomach to try and get an early night if discussions about the book proved to be too boring. Amaka had been no help with her Lanny problem, and she'd worked 3 late nights in a row. Amaka tapped her arm lightly. Go after we vote. Latoya shot her a look. I see you. What? Amaka feigned. Girl, I know you're low-key sneaky, the way you text everyone before a vote. Latoya pointed a finger in Amaka's face. Amaka looked like she was trying not to crumble into laughter. What are you talking about? Are you telling me you're not happy we went with the DCA? That's not the point. Can we please let this go? Nana interrupted. I can see the exact time everyone votes on the app, and no one has changed their mind after submitting their vote. You see? Thank you, Amaka gloated. Just because you didn't get the outcome you wanted. I thought Americans invented democracy. Latoya swung back, clearly enjoying the repartee. At least we have elections. When I first started the book club, we were open to all genres. Nana took charge, speaking directly to Dara, but the ladies hated my suggestions. So now we have 2 rules, no nonfiction and no books on slavery. Which is a travesty. I mean, homegoing, amazing. Latoya held her arms out dramatically. Nana refused to be derailed. That was our first book, and we loved it. But we agreed, no more slavery. That's not what we want to be focusing on. And even though Nothing to Envy was an incredible portrayal of life in North Korea, no one bothered to finish it except me. So we're not doing fiction anymore. Anyway, each person nominates 1 book every meeting, tells us why we should read it, and then we vote anonymously online. The books we don't choose are added to a short list, and then every 3 months we vote from that list. Oh, and the third rule is that it has to be a book no one has read before, so it's best to come with a few options. Why every 3 months? Dara asked curiously. Because.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, so we're going to ask a couple of questions before we open the Q&A. Themes on inspiration. So firstly, what inspired you to write this book? And when did the first sort of inkling of idea of the book come? And when you got that idea, how did you go about developing it?
I started writing it about a year after I moved to Singapore. I actually wrote the book in that year, which was quite a dark book, quite a heavy book. And I wanted to write something light. I think around that time I was thinking about what I was putting out into the world. I mean, nobody was reading it, but psychologically I was like, is this what I want to be writing? I was meeting lots of different women in Singapore. I had a blog at the time, so I would post every week a little extract from what I was developing. And so it was just a way of capturing lots of different Nigerian women, African American women, how different we all were. We'd all come together in a space, and you would assume that we would all have similar views and ways of like looking at life and opinions, and we really didn't. So it just started off from there with my blog. And then I developed it over several years. But the original sort of inspiration was moving to a new country, meeting lots of different types of women, and being inspired by that.
Nice, nice. I mean, that kind of answers my second question, which is why Singapore. Very interesting because a lot of diaspora is the West, like UK, US, maybe even like Dubai. Singapore just seems like such a random place where, and obviously there's a community there because you live there. It seems like such a random place to expect a story about three Nigerian women to be set. So it was quite interesting to see that and discover that, oh, well, maybe there is a something going on there. So the book title, why the book title?
I actually had a different title all the years I was working on the book. So it was originally called The Painted Ladies, which is a type of butterfly that migrates from West Africa to Europe. So I loved the sort of the theme of journey and migration. So that was my working title for many years. And then um, when my agent and I were selling it to publishers, and we sold it to two publishers, one in the UK and one in the US. The US publisher told us that that title actually had some negative connotations in the States, which I had never heard of. And the UK editor had never. And so I fought for it for a while, and then it was very clear that they weren't going to go with that title. It just wasn't the sort of message that we were trying to communicate. So for about 4 months, we brainstormed titles. And I mean, almost everyone I know was involved in giving me their opinion. It's actually very challenging coming up with a title after you've written a book, because you're trying to find a title that captures, the mood, the tone, the genre. There was no book cover at that time, but um, we very quickly hit upon the idea of heat being symbolic of passion, intensity, stress, as well as the climate is very similar to Nigeria, just more humid. Um, and then just by having several rounds, someone put the word such in. There was a book a few years ago called Such a Fun Age. We liked that word. So we played around with it. And then the American editor came up with In Such Tremendous Heat, which everyone loved. So even though they're in two different editing houses, publishing houses, it's the same umbrella publisher. So we work closely together. But then, we went with that. And then the American editor told her boss, and her boss didn't like the title. So she'd done all this amazing work, come up with this great title. And so there is actually a different title in America because the editor then had to come up with another title. Some bosses are really tough. So yeah, we've got two different titles.
That's so funny. I can't imagine it being called any other book. I think the heat is very symbolic, and the stress is evident. I think that's something that runs through the three ladies. The weather is something that you get immediately when you start reading the book, and the building passion. Starting with Amaka and her guy, just that sort of soft sort of entry, and then boom, when she meets Lani, it's like whoosh, right, and it's like I think it works really, really, really well. So that's lovely. So you're answering like a couple of questions at the same time, so I'm going to skip some. Um, who is your favorite character and why?
I mean, if I had to choose, probably one of the secondary characters called Kike.
Yes,
I quite
yeah,
like her.
yeah.
I have a friend who read an early version of the book, and she said she felt like you weren't supposed to like her.
Yeah.
Because some of the other characters are very like triggered by her.
Yes,
But
yes.
actually, I think that
She's chilled.
yeah, and I feel she's one of the characters that I'm looking forward to exploring further in the future. But I feel like she walks into a room and gets a lot of judgment, and people think they know her and they don't.
Yeah.
And I don't know. There's something about her I found quite poignant.
That's
Like yeah.
that's interesting. Now, still on the theme of the characters, are there any similarities between any of the characters. For instance, Lillian was also a language teacher, and so were you, teaching the same languages. So do we have some of like themes of you sort of like floating around in the book?
I don't think so, but
Yeah.
friends say they see elements of me in all three of them.
Yes.
I mean, maybe Dara to some extent. I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah.
I have a lot of lawyers in my life, but I'm not a lawyer. But she's maybe I could have been. I could have been. If I was a lawyer, I might be similar to her.
Yeah.
Like she's very she was very good at school. She was very academic. She follows the rules. She gets very frustrated when things don't work out the way they're supposed to. And her journey in the book is figuring out that life doesn't always work the way that you were told, or that you're just going to get best grades and then get a place in a law firm, and you're not just going to work hard and it's all going to work out for you. That actually you might need certain skill sets that are a little bit dubious to get ahead, and that's what she struggles with.
We're starting to see that. Okay, so how did you go about developing your characters? I know you said earlier on that these were some of the women you were meeting. So how did you take those inspirations and turn them into fully fledged characters?
I think it's a long process, but like the initial stage of it is like I can't write until they're very clear to me. So there is a lot of thinking before I start. Or at least their arc is quite clear. I already know the end. And then I start to do character biographies. So I ask and then I answer a lot of questions about them, like the smallest questions to the biggest questions, to like if they were in this hypothetical situation, what would they do? What's their favorite color? What's their favorite song? Just as many questions as I can. So I do a lot of that. And then I just think with each redraft, there's usually one draft that's focused on the characters. And then different drafts have different purposes, but I don't know. I think just over time, there needs to be something internal that's driving them. So you're hopefully making them more fleshed out with each draft.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I can really pinpoint how I do it.
I mean, it makes sense with the character biographies, and I guess like with character development in books and film, I feel like in the film particularly because it's video format, when the character has an arc that is like somebody has answered all the questions, it's easier to feel that the person is real and authentic because you can see how little quirks like sort of show up from their childhood to
and I like the connection to film because with film, characters have to show you who they are. Like they have to do something. Like a character will, make a fuss about the way they make a cup of tea, and that will communicate what kind of person they are. Or so the play The Crucible just came to mind. At the beginning of the play, the main character is talking to his wife, and it's a normal scene. It's a bit tense, and then she asks him, he tastes the food, and she asks him how it is, and he says delicious. And as soon as she goes, he puts a bit of salt. and that communicates like a lot of how he's trying to be very sensitive. So I think characters do things. So that sort of background in theater helped a lot with this, I guess, with making the characters physically do things, like be more action based.
And I think I'm just thinking of, I think it's Dara with her childhood and the present day person. You can sort of see the parallels coming through with a lot of what happened there, showing up as the person she is today. And I think that's really nicely done because when a situation does come up, her reaction is very much like, oh, this is the model that I've been given and I don't know how to do anything else, even though maybe I should be doing something else. Yeah, so that's really interesting. But this sounds like a lot of work and a long time process. So how long did it take you to write and research and basically produce the final draft of the book?
On and off, about 7 years.
Ooh.
Yeah, on and off.
Well done. Yeah, so now we're going to sort of talk about the central themes in the book. So the book follows the lives of three Nigerian women, apparently living their dreams in luscious and hot Singapore until a delicious stranger upends their lives. Delicious is my word. So, how did you weave the three lives of those ladies together so seamlessly? Because when you're reading the book, it doesn't miss a beat and everything, there's no gaps really. So I think that was really well done. How did you manage to do that?
Thank you. I mean, it's challenging. There definitely was a point where I thought, oh, this would have been easier if I just had one perspective. Especially for like your first book where you are still learning how to write. That thought definitely came in my mind, but I love the three characters, and I've always loved like multiple perspectives. Like even in film, I've always loved that. So I guess I just wrote what I enjoyed writing. But I had to create a timeline. I had to create several timelines. So each character had their historical timelines, and my editors would prompt me if there was something that wasn't clear. But then I also had to create a timeline for the events in the book. So it all happens over the course of a year. And so it helped, that really helped, especially because the weather is so distinctive in Singapore. And so it helped me to think, okay, it's a rainy season. They're going to be indoors more. Certain events will make more sense here, or it's the summer, or at one point we have haze, which is this smoke that blows from the Sumatra region, and then you're stuck indoors with masks every year, almost every year. So I had to do the like really detailed timelines, and then sometimes obviously one character will flow into another character's chapter, so I had to be like, okay, who was there, and would they already know that? So that did add a lot of work, but luckily by that stage I had my editors. So but because the first few drafts, like, you don't know if anyone's going to read it, so you don't really care if they're holes, but you have to when you realize someone is actually going to read it.
Someone's going to pay for it and be like, what's going on here? That's so interesting, because it's almost like a mini masterclass we're experiencing here, right? Because that's so technical. You wouldn't expect that, people are doing as much technical work, having like basically a timeline, historical timeline, and a timeline of the book, and making sure that everything matches together. That's really interesting. So what central themes are you exploring, and what key messages did you want readers to take away, if any, right?
Well, the first thing I'll say is when I was writing it, I didn't have messages. I was trying to write a story that was entertaining, engaging, which is a big enough job.
Yes.
That made you want to keep reading, that had characters that were relatable, authentic, but a plot line that was fun, escapist. When I first moved to Singapore, Crazy Rich Asians had just been published. It was huge, and I loved the trilogy. And it's a different book, but it is definitely a page turner. So I enjoyed that, and I feel like my eyes kind of open in terms of different types of genres that I could write. So for me, I was learning how to write. Can I tell a good story? And unfortunately, as much as you may think it's a good story, someone objectively has to say, okay, yeah, we think this could be good. So really, that was why I wrote the book. Having talked about it now for like a year and answered lots of questions, I would say that the themes in the book would be the past, your history, childhood baggage, friendship. Um, but I also think like the women in the book, it's not a romance. Like one character does have a romantic relationship with the Lani, the character, the catalyst, but the other two have a relationship with him that is not romantic. So one of them, they become embroiled in a workplace rivalry. So there I'm kind of exploring what it's like to be like the only Black woman and the only Black man in a firm that have been pitted against each other, and who are kind of having to squash their natural inclination to work together, to maybe even befriend each other. So that's with that storyline. And then with the Lillian, the American character, Lani looks very, very similar to her late father. And I, with that, I'm just intrigued by, how many different genetic strands come from our part of Africa, like, and then go around the world. And it's possible that, that could happen. So yeah, I think those would be some of the themes. And if there was a message, I guess it would be that, I don't know, I feel like I'm not in my 30s anymore, but I feel like in your 30s, you've made a load of decisions. You've gone down a certain path, you've trained, you're working, you've been working for a while, maybe you're earning a certain amount. You have a lot to lose. You may be married, you may have kids, but like, it's not easy to just pause and stop and pivot, or to say, or to admit that you've gone down the wrong path. And all three women are stuck in some way down the wrong path and don't know how to admit that. And you know, someone was saying to me, why can't they just talk to each other? Like, just talk to each other and then the book would be over. And then, but the problem is, like, you're asking them to talk about things that are so like tied up with not just who they are, but how they've been brought up to be, to think, the people that they're trying to make proud. So if there was a message, it would be that you have to address certain things in order to move forward in life. And that takes a lot of courage.
Yes, I really see that, especially, I mean, it's obviously with all of them, but I think Lillian's is very clear, especially when she has that therapy session when everything just comes bubbling up. and it's like her husband's looking at her to be like, whoa, didn't realize this was didn't realize this was all in the background there. And so that's really interesting because she's already thinking to herself in her own private time. She's having these conversations as well with the therapist, and so it's like you see that there's just a lot going on, especially with the past is just literally coming at the forefront of the present. So speaking about Lillian and Lani, why the theme of reincarnation? Why did you, because he's, when she sees him, she's like, oh, that looks like my dad, right? So what was, and I know you just said you're exploring themes of genetic, but why draw such a close like parallel?
I don't know. I feel like maybe it's been Yoruba, I don't know. But I feel like reincarnation's always been something that I've talked about. I mean, I love Wole Soyinka. It's in his plays, it's in a lot of poetry, it's in our names, it's in our father's names, our like grandmother, like, with Babatunde. And it's always been something that's been like quite normal to me, the idea of it. So I mean, I don't want to give too much away with the plot for people that haven't read it, but it's something she thinks about. It's something she considers, she thinks about. So I don't know if I thought too much about it. It just seemed like because of the journey she's on, she's considering a lot of different reasons for why he may look like her father.
Okay, well, okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, so um, still on the topic of women, but coming outside of the book and maybe just talking about the literary sphere and the industry. So we know here in the work that we do here that women are underrepresented in like almost every aspect of being at the top in almost every industry. Is it the same in literature? Is it the same? You getting the same disparity? Because like in art, for instance, there's loads of female artists, but then when you do all the art deals and total the volume of art sold by men and women and the amount of solo exhibitions, you suddenly see that women go whoop, all the way down here and men are huge. And even like the most expensive painting sold, I think the man's one's like 5 times the price of the woman's one. So I'm wondering if you see those parallels or you've seen those parallels in your work as a writer.
I think it depends on the genre. I am pleased that there are lots of female writers across different genres. So this is contemporary fiction, but in literary fiction, in young adult romance, there may be some genres, science fiction, maybe crime, thriller,
Science
that
fiction,
are definitely
yes.
dominated.
Yeah.
Like I think I'm not sure what the statistics are in terms of readers, but like women buy books written by women. So we know that like our female readers are going to show up. But I think it would be interesting to look at like the New York Times bestsellers and see like how many of like the Harlan Cobens and the, like there's they say that in publishing, like the 90% of the money made from publishing is made from 10% of the authors that publish. So I think that's the big question is from that 10%, are they, how much of them are men?
And
I don't
that
know.
would be really interesting. And I mean, I did have this question pegged a little bit further down, but I think we can ask it now since we're talking about publishing. And you just said an interesting fact. So there's an author, a Sunday Times bestseller, who's been having a debate, and some other authors in the UK about whether it's worth writing books anymore. And one of the stats was that only 4% of authors sell more than 1,000 books, which is kind of crazy, right? If you think how many authors there are. So it seems like it's really hard to be actually successful. So well done to you because you've done that. But do you have any thoughts on that? Any thoughts on like, the future of publishing and the future of writing? Because there's Amazon, there's Kindle, there's Audible, Spotify has audiobooks as well. Is that something that you see changing the narrative, or do you think that books will always be here?
Yeah, so that's from the UK, isn't it? That's I mean, be interesting to see in different countries. I don't know. I think I love reading, so I'm always going to buy books. And we had this debate when when ebooks were coming out like 15, 20 years ago with like Kindles and things like that. And there was this huge thing that, oh, when they're going to die out, the physical. And then they realized that actually they've been selling just as much, if not more, physical copies in the UK. So, and now you, like you say, you have audiobooks as well. Yeah, I don't know. There may be a push and pull tension, but if we don't read, because I guess the thing is, there are lots of writers, but do they want to write books, or do they want to write short form blogs and things like that? I followed the books because earlier you'd asked me like, who's my favorite writer? And I don't have one. I love books. So there are a few writers that I actually like the writer, but I'm like, I don't remember the last time I actually read a book I enjoyed, but I love her. And then there's some books that I just love. So I don't know. I think I will always read books. And I think it's easy for us to say that if you've grown up reading lots of books, like that's very privileged. But what about like future generations that haven't read lots of books, and we're saying to them, "Oh, well, books
digital age."
So I don't know if I can speak
And I
to
mean,
that.
there have been, I agree, maybe there will always be this push and pull because there have been the rise of Medium, Substack, Patreon, all these like places where writers are just writing digitally directly to their audience and cutting out the publishing and just being like, well, it's so much work. And then you have to sort of be like, oh, I got an advance. And, you know,
I don't see fiction on there. I see them writing ideas, memoirs.
Yes, yeah. I think
with
people have started
fiction.
writing short stories on like Substack, but I mean, it's relatively new if you think about the age of publishing versus the age of like, well, the age of physical books versus like this new digital era where people are writing online. I know I listened to this lady called Emma Gannon, and she was talking about how she makes six figures on Substack. So she actually makes more writing via her newsletters than writing books, and she's published 6 books and she's been a bestseller I think like 3 times. So that's kind of a crazy like, you know, yeah, it is a crazy comparison to think that okay, you spent 6 years writing a book, and then she also spent 6 years writing a book as well. So and then now she's like, oh, I wrote this newsletter and then I got £5,000 just by hitting send. So it's very interesting conversation. So yes, sorry, back to the book. Okay, so writing process. Can you talk us through your writing process in general, and do you have a creative routine?
Not really. It depends on what draft of the book. So the first draft is always the hardest, just to put it down from beginning to end. My process is to try and force myself to write, because I find all different reasons why I shouldn't write, why I should clean my house, reply to emails, you know. I don't necessarily have a process. By the time you get to the second, third draft, it's fun. And then I can take my laptop anywhere because it's, you know, it's already there. It's like you've got a piece of wood already, you've chopped down the tree and now you're just carving it. And then you've got that process of carving and smoothing and sanding. But the first big draft is hard work. So I don't really have a process other than to try and find a way to force myself to write, and then I remember how much I love it. The things I do that help me are more specific, like little tricks. So for example, I never, it's really when I stop writing. So I never stop writing at the end of a chapter or at the end of a section or at the end of a sentence. I always stop mid something so that when I come back the next day, I don't have this pressure of having to like look at an empty page and start again. So even if I just write a few notes, I'll just put something down. And I guess that's really it, really. I type, so sometimes I'll take a notebook and I'll write by hand. Sometimes I'll take notes on my phone. It can be very messy. As long as something's happening, I'm thinking about it. But the process is going to be very different with my second book because I'm not going to have 7 years because there's a contract and with like terms.
I was going to ask, is there a little bit more pressure on?
Yeah, there is, which is fine. I like pressure. I'll have a deadline in like 3 days before I'll get cooking, so I don't mind that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Okay, so I think, well, your book has been successful, which is amazing. And so what has been the most rewarding part about bringing this book to life?
Probably the process of working with my editors.
Okay.
So that was about a year.
Yeah.
Because that was I mean, I had my agent for about 18 months before we sold the book.
Yeah.
And the thing about agents is that they don't make any money until they sell the book.
Yeah.
So you should never pay anything to take your book. So for like 18 months, well, if you have an editorial agent and they're helping you like develop the book, work on the book so that it can be strong enough to sell.
Yeah.
So the same way you were cold calling them, they're cold calling publishers.
Yeah.
But so that was great. But the process of working with the editors, I had two, which is very unusual. And I would send them the draft. One of them would read it, put their notes in the comment, send it to the other one. She would respond to some of the comments as well as her own.
Yes, yes.
And so that was really fun seeing,
Yeah.
we're in 3 different countries, sometimes sharing little jokes in the margins. But to be working on it with 2 professionals who were trying to help you make it as strong as it could be,
Yeah.
that was a really great process, because I knew that once it came out, I have no control
Yeah.
over how people respond to it, what they think about it.
Yeah.
It's like a child. You
Yeah.
have to let it go into the world, and it's
Yeah.
going to do what it's going to do. But the process of working with the editors was wonderful. I don't know if the next one will be as good, but I really appreciated and valued that process.
Okay, so did you have any challenges whilst writing? Did you have any challenges sort of like publishing, post-publishing? Were there any challenges that you had at any point in time with the process of this book? And if so, how did you overcome them? You just had a great time.
I don't know, like specifically challenge. The whole process is challenging, so I'm not
Yeah.
really sure. Do you mean did anything go wrong?
Maybe. Did anything go wrong? Or was there anything that was sort of unexpected,
it
maybe?
takes a long time. I think that's the thing that maybe people don't realize. It takes a really long time. So, when I signed the publishing deal, this even moved a little faster than normal because it was 2020 when I got my agent, so it was COVID. So things had slowed down and people were ready to move after COVID, like move as quickly as possible. But I think, it came out 2023 and I think we sold it like 2021. So it's like 2 years.
Yeah.
So the whole process,
That
of
is a
everyone thinking, oh, is it going to come out in 6 months? I think it just takes a really long time, and you're always doing one redraft after another, and then it goes to a line editor who's looking for mistakes, and then there's another editor who's checking to make sure that what you said is true in this country is really true.
Yeah.
It just takes a really long time.
Okay. Okay, so I guess a couple of questions about yourself. So you already answered who's your favorite author. You have a couple that you like. You don't really have any specific ones. Do you have a book that has changed your life significantly in any way that made you think, oh, this is
Well, I think Half of a Yellow Sun, maybe.
yeah, okay.
Because I remember reading Purple Hibiscus.
Yeah.
And like really liking it, really enjoying it. And then there was quite a big gap between that and Half of a Yellow Sun.
Yeah.
And it was the first time I'd read like, a contemporary Nigerian writer who was like, a similar age group as me
Yeah.
in real time. Because I studied English at university, so everyone I read was dead.
Yeah.
So reading someone who was publishing in real time. And then I remember, I wasn't as well read then, but I remember reading the second Half of the Other Sun and thinking, something's happened to this writer.
Yeah.
Like from first book to the second book, like
Yeah.
something's happened. Like
Yeah.
she's not the same writer, and being like, oh, this can happen, which also gave me a little bit of grace that
Yeah.
you can grow, hopefully, one book to the next.
Yes.
But probably Half of the Yellow Sun, I've loved it. I found it very powerful. It's one of the books I reread every couple of years.
Yeah.
And I don't really like rereading, but I reread it. And then I remember I was at drama school at the time, and like all my teachers, like all these English teachers would come and be like, have you read Half of the Yellow Sun? It's so great. And I'm like, how are all these like English people coming up to me telling me to go and read this book? And they were like, oh my God, I remember the war when we were young. And I was like, wow, okay, she's really touched something here. So yeah, Half of a Yellow Sun.
That was pivotal. I remember that as well when that book came out. Okay, so this leads me on to my next question. So you haven't always been an author. So yeah, so can you tell us a little bit about your previous life as an actress
Okay,
on
sure.
stage?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'll say is I was always a writer since I was like 4. I was always a writer. So I think that definitely came first. And then like just writing stories, writing plays, getting my siblings to be in them, putting them on for my parents, writing the school play. Like the writing always came first. And then like if someone dropped out or something, I'd be in it. But, I have a younger brother who's an actor. A lot of my friends are actors, but it wasn't until I went to UCL and in my final year, I made a friend in my final year who wanted to direct. Her father is quite a famous actor. So she put on a production of Titus Andronicus, which is a Shakespeare play. It's a very gory play. And there is a Moor in the play, like a North African character who's a man, and she couldn't find a black male actor. Or she didn't find anyone who wanted to do it. UCL is a big university, but she couldn't find anyone. So she asked me if I'd do it. And that's how I got into acting. It was just fun, but also like a really heavy, deep play that allowed me to do a lot of crazy things on stage. So I was like, what is this? And then after that, I did another Shakespeare play, again, playing Romeo and Juliet, playing Mercutio. So I was playing men, right, like at the beginning. And then, I don't know, I kind of like fell in with the crowd of actors at uni. And I took a year off to work. I worked at The Independent. I worked at a film production company. I was doing English, so I had no idea what to do with my life, which is what happens when you do a degree like English. You don't know if you should be a journalist or a lawyer. So I was trying everything, but I was also auditioning for drama schools, which my parents weren't very happy about. But in the end, mainly because I got into RADA, which is such a good school, it was another 3 years of studying, which I didn't plan. I thought I'd just do like a 1-year course. But once I got in, you know, I feel like the dice had rolled at that point. And so that's how I got into acting. I still feel like there was some force guiding me down that path because it really wasn't my plan at all. I thought I would be a journalist, maybe law, but probably not. And so, yeah, and so I trained, and then I worked for about 3 years doing TV and stage. But I don't know, I always wanted to write books. I just didn't think I was good enough. I tried writing plays. Plays are very hard to write. Good plays are very hard to write. So, you know, I guess what I'm saying is like the journey wasn't one of just like waking up one day and writing a book. You know, I grew up in my 20s watching like amazing Nigerian writers and female writers publishing, and they just made it look so easy. And they did it so young. Like I remember Helen Oyeyemi like publishing at like 19. I was like, what? Like how? And then, you know, even Chimamanda, like she was amazing, and lots of other writers, just Zadie Smith, you know, public getting a deal while still at university. Like people were doing it really young, and who knows, maybe publishing also likes that story as well. So maybe they highlight those particular people. But for me, it took me having to learn how to write. It took me quite a long time before I was able to kind of birth this, because sometimes you have an idea, but you don't have the skill set. So it definitely took a while. Yeah.
And did you have any sort of like imposter syndrome whilst you were writing? Because you just mentioned that it took you some time. So were you at one point thinking that, oh, this is like kind of like, oh yeah, I'm writing, but am I writing? Like, did you have any of those feelings?
No, actually, no, because by the time I started working on this book, I joined a writers group, which is always my advice, which I know you're going to ask me, but anyone that wants to write is to join a writers group. Book clubs are great, but if you want to write, like I joined this incredible writers group in Singapore, which is disbanded now, unfortunately. And it started off with about 30 people, and then it was about 300 by the end. And we broke off into genres. And so once a month, you would submit the first 3,000 words, and whoever turned up would read it, give you feedback right there and then. And they weren't your friends, they weren't your family, they were very honest, and they would scribble their notes, and then you would grab all this feedback back, and then you had another month to implement the changes. So it was like a really intensive school or course.
Wow, that's
so by the time I was writing this, I wasn't thinking about, am I good enough? I was just enjoying writing. I surrounded myself with writers, and the process was just more enjoyable. So I just kind of focused on that.
That's really, really nice. So what advice do you have for aspiring writers?
Join a writers group.
Join a writers group. I don't know, do you know the writers groups here? I guess there must be.
I mean, there are a couple of book clubs that I am aware of, and I know that one has developed a writers group.
Okay.
So I'm sure there must be. Or you can, you know, create one.
Yeah.
With people
Roving Heights. So do you know? Okay, and I guess finally, and then we can hand over to the ladies for some questions. What's next? I know that you are, what's next for you? What's next for readers? I know you're adapting the book for TV, so do you have anybody in mind who you'd like to act the characters, your main characters? And your second novel, are we going to get any hints as to what that may be? So yeah, what's next?
Yes, I mean the adaptation process has just started. So casting wise, I mean, I do have an idea for the Lani character, but then I shared it and they were like, no. So I don't know if I'll have any say with that, but it needs to be someone that makes sense. You know, when you see them, you need to understand like why he affects the characters, but also why they project a lot onto him. So that's that's
interesting, the projection, because you definitely get that with Dara. I'm like, I don't even know if you're seeing clearly at this point. Like interpretation of reality is so like far on this side. And she's used that to like then judge the next set of actions she should take.
Which we do sometimes.
Yeah, no, which we do, but it's just interesting
Yeah.
how everybody else sees something completely different, but she's adamant that what she says is the right version and everybody else is wrong, which is kind of like, yeah, which is kind
And
of
then the second book is set in Lagos, so it's a little different. But again, I'm still on the first draft, so it could change.
Okay, well, good luck with that. We look forward to reading that, and really big congratulations. I think it's exactly what you wanted it to be. A page turner. It reminds me of like sort of those good TV series when you're just like everybody's like, yeah, are you watching? What episode are you on? And you are gonna turn the pages. And I do think that the secondary characters do balance the main characters really well because they're quite intense. And I think whenever they come across a secondary character, you can sort of get this sort of juxtaposition that allows you to like re-engage with them again, which is really good. That's really good. So Q&A. I don't know if people have questions. I know some members have read the book. I'm gonna get up. Any questions? Did I ask all the questions? Okay, you've got a question here.
Well done. It's fascinating. I haven't read the book, but the next book I'm going to read is this one. Not related to the book. You talked about do you call it the writers group that was disbanded? Why did that happen?
The writer who started the group, she's actually published, I think, four books now. She moved back to the UK. So for about a year before she moved, she kept calling out to anyone who might want to run the group. So we did have about 4 or 5 people running subgroups, but it had become such a massive job. You know, it had set up as a company. You know, they ran it properly as an establishment. They published 2 anthologies of short stories. And I think that it was just a really big job, that it was her baby and nobody really wanted to take it on. So that's why.
Hi, Kehinde. My question is, what are you doing in Singapore? I think I may have missed that. How did you get to Singapore? And why are you still in Singapore? And what were your first impressions? Because I went to Singapore and I have certain impressions. What were your first impressions?
Well, I moved when I got married. I was teaching pretty much the whole time that I've been there, but the last 2 years I've been writing. So I was teaching, first of all, in a language school, and then I moved to an international school. So I've been teaching English, drama, and EAL. My first and why am I there? My kids are there, so my first impression. The first time I went on a holiday. I went from London, Singapore to Lagos, so it was quite an interesting contrast. You know, I was very jet lagged, and my first time experiencing that jet lag was horrible. So the first few days, I really didn't enjoy it at all. It's very hot, but it's very humid. So it's like being in a hot bathroom everywhere you go. Even though it's well air conditioned everywhere, but it's still like, it was very uncomfortable. And so I remember like the first few days, I went into a shopping mall, and all the shopping malls on this particular street are all connected. So you can walk the entire length of, you know, what is like Oxford Street in London without stepping onto the pavement. You can just go from one mall to another, several floors down to basement 2, but you can also get lost very easily. So I remember getting lost, being jet lagged, very teary, exhausted, had no idea where I was. And then someone guided me down to the basement where the train station was so I could get home. So, I mean, I did enjoy it, but I'm just remembering now, like, actually it wasn't plain sailing. Yeah, it was. And I think my dad had been in the 60s, so he was telling me about it, and I was just like, okay, this is very different. It changed a lot, 60s or 70s. So yeah, my relationship with it has changed over time now that I actually actually living there. But the first time I went, it was on holiday. No, I wouldn't say it's large. No, I mean, in terms of like an African, maybe sizable, but no, I wouldn't say it's a large Nigerian.
Okay, my name is Bimbala Wright, and I'm Mummy 3 to Kehinde. You know, the question was asked that what advice, and you said join a writers group. A lot of the, and let's say the Gen Zs, that demographic in Nigeria, increasingly moving into the creative space. And of course, writing is one of those subsectors. So, you know, from this process, what are those learning points that you would sort of give as advice to your younger self that would inspire that next, I mean, you're young, but that next generation, so that they don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel, they can learn from, you know, from your journey?
Thank you. So two things. One, I would say, from what I can see of what I'm reading from a lot of younger writers, is that there seems to be a difference between self-expression, writing as self-expression, and writing as craft. So maybe this is connected to Medium and Substack. So I think, you know, to be a writer is to, today, it feels is to express ideas, express your feelings. And that works beautifully for nonfiction, although when you read memoirs and self-help books, usually the people writing have had experiences, careers, something to convey, something of worth, of value. So sometimes things do take time. But even when you're young, as I've said, lots of young writers published when I was, you know, young, there was a sense that writing was about craft, like how to tell a story. And I was reading a lot of literary fiction. My journey included accepting that I'm not a literary writer, which was actually quite a hard pill to swallow, because I thought to be literary was to be good and everything else was pulp fiction, you know, which isn't true. So if I was going to give advice to young writers now, I would say that there is a distinction between writing as self-expression, which is freeing and positive, and the process of learning how to tell a story, which you can learn anywhere in the world. It comes with practice, it comes with reading widely, and reading about writing, which is one of the things I really enjoy. Actually, I like reading about writing instead of actually sitting down to write. But so that would be the first thing, is to just say there is a difference. You know, you don't have to go and do an MFA in creative writing. I'm not saying you should do that, but you can be very intentional about learning how to tell a story, because it is a craft in the same way as painting is a craft or architecture is a craft. The second thing I would say is, I think the hardest challenge is not to get distracted. And so, yes, I was young once, but I didn't have the internet. I didn't have the internet at uni. I didn't have the internet in my 20s. I didn't have Instagram. I didn't know what other writers were doing. I wasn't like, I mean, if you got into like the New York, one of those literary magazines, that I might know who you are. But if your book didn't come out in a bookshop, I didn't know who you were. So this would be advice that my acting teacher gave me at drama school, which is, you know, you're a racehorse, you know, one of those like thoroughbreds. Put on blinkers and really try to just stay focused and not get distracted. Because I think it must be really hard, you know, to sit down and write, and then you have all these apps and all, like, it must be really, and to have to think that that's normal, because we all have them, but I don't think they're normal, because I remember when they didn't exist. So I think I would say, like, you know, to maybe find a way to shut all of that out sometimes, because the actual process of writing is boring and one of solitude, and no one's going to read what you write for lots of it. You have to genuinely like the characters and the story, and, like, you know, it's, you got to find it funny, you got to find it entertaining. So I think that's what I'd say.
Thank you, Kehinde. Those were very that's very good advice, even for us older people, to sort of, you know, focus and shut down all the distractions. But there was something you were talking about that I think I missed. The TV adaptation. I just wanted you to talk about it as much as you can, obviously, what you can share. Where is it? Is it in the UK, or, you know, I missed that bit and I just wanted to.
Sure, of course, thank you. So at the end of, I think it was 2022, I was talking with my agent. I knew that they'd been trying to sell it, and but they're great agents, so I don't pressure them. I know they will let me know if something's come up. And so I had a chat with my agent, and it was very clear that nobody was interested. And she just said, look, I think if it was set in London or New York, we'd have interest by now, because the production companies feel like it's just logistically too hard. They don't have any partners out there. And I thought, honestly, I thought I was disappointed, but I thought, "Oh, okay, like no one promised me that this was going to happen. I didn't write this thinking this is what would happen. As you've said, it's hard enough just to sell the book. And so actually in the back of my mind, I thought, oh, maybe the second book or the third book, because I'm quite optimistic like that. I'm like, I'll get them on the second book or the third book, you know. And then I think it was maybe 3 or 4 months later, I wake up in the morning, there's a time difference in Singapore, and I got an email saying that a production company in America were interested. And it's run by a woman called Jenna Bush Hager, who is actually George W. Bush's daughter, randomly. And they wanted to have a Zoom. They were interested in the book. And I mean, you could have knocked me down with a feather, because they'd said, like, she told me nobody was interested. So we had this Zoom a few days later, and with her and some other people on the production company, and they tell me that they have what they call a first look deal with a studio, which means that anything they bring, they need to bring to the studio first, and they have this with Universal Studios. So again, I was like, okay, interesting. And then one of the things they said on the Zoom was that the fact that it was set in Asia is why they're interested. So the very thing that made it completely unappealing was exactly why they liked it. And that's because it was a combination of things. In America, they want more Asia-focused, Asian character-based material, but also in Australia, which is like on the other side of me, there's a lot of interest in Asia. They love the fact that it's Black characters, but they also get to put Asian, I mean, so they want to basically ride the coattail of Crazy Rich Asians, which I'm here for, very happy to do. And so, I mean, that was a real light bulb moment for me, that feeling of like the very thing that was rejected was what they were seeking. And then actually we came off the call, and then my agent said, look, she has a book club. So as much as this is exciting, we really want the book club, because things can get optioned but never get made. But the book club means that lots of people will read it in America. But they're really adamant that you understand that if they take it for the film, the TV, they may not take it for the book club, and like there's no guarantees. So it may work on screen, but it doesn't mean it's right for her book club, and vice versa. But in the end, they took it for the book club as well, which was amazing. So that was the journey. And then, the strikes were happening in America, so that delayed everything by about 6 months, negotiations, everything. And then at some point last year, we signed, and we've just got a co-writer, so someone a little bit more experienced in TV. So it's a long road, it's a long process. We pray that it does get to production, but I've learned a lot already in this process. But yeah, that's how it came about. Thank you.
All right. So my question is actually kind of a combination of things. So how did you find your voice as a writer? Like, how did you decide, okay, this is how, like, okay, in terms of deciding on the genre of writing you wanted to do, and then finding within that genre of writing? And then my secondary question is, as an avid reader, were you concerned about all these books that you had read, and because when I read books, they become a part of me in a sense. So was there a concern that you would sound like an existing writer as you were writing the book? And was there an effort to kind of exclude those voices, if that makes sense?
Thank you. Great questions. The first one, first of all, finding my genre and then finding my voice. So finding my genre was a different stage, because like I said, I read a lot of literary fiction. So I really thought that's what I was writing. That's what I wanted to write. I had a friend read an early version of the book, give me feedback. And then she reads a lot of nonfiction. So I respected her view, because I thought if a nonfiction person likes it, it's positive. And then I said to her, I just made like an offhand comment. I was like, okay, now I need to go and like adichie it. And she was like, what? So I was like, well, now I need to go make it good. Like make it, prosy, make it sing, And she was like, why do you need to do that? I was like, well, like I think that's, and she was like, why can't it just be what it is? And I was like, oh yeah, I guess. I mean, and she's an actress, and when we play characters, we have to be very open to letting whatever comes through, come through, not control too much. So I was like, so she kind of made that connection, that analogy. And so that was scary though, because that meant not deliberately trying to be good, but to just let it unfold. So that was how I found my genre. I realized that I was contemporary fiction by reading lots of books with my writers group and realizing, oh, there is this, they used to call it women's fiction. They don't call it that anymore now, but like contemporary fiction. So, you know, modern, slick, you know, with looking at everyday issues maybe, and recognizable, but hopefully still well written, still caring about like the language, the setting and things like that. And then my voice, well, I guess that's connected as well. Yeah, that's my voice. I don't know. I think I'm still finding it, but my second book has some similarities in terms of some of the themes. And by just allowing that book to be what it is, I'm realizing, oh, I'm that writer. Oh, okay, I'm always going to be talking about that. But that wasn't in my mind when I first wrote this. You know, there's certain things in this book that I forgot were in there. And then when last year I read it from beginning to end, and I was like, oh, I really went in on that. Like I didn't even realize how much this particular topic or idea bothered me, and it was in there. So I think I'm still finding it. And then the second question, you know, it's interesting about not letting other books affect me. I don't read a lot when I'm writing the first draft. So I try to, and that's really hard. And I can always tell how happy I am by if I'm reading or not, and how like down I get if I'm not reading. So I'll try and read a lot of nonfiction, or I'll deliberately read something, you know, I don't know, Victorian fiction or something like very different, Dickens or somebody that's very different from what I'm writing. So for example, with my current book, I'm not reading anything by any Nigerian contemporary writers because it's set in Lagos, and I really don't want to be influenced by what they're writing. I did last year read Ayobami Adebayo's book. You know, she wrote Stay With Me, her second book. I can't remember. What's it called? Spell of Good Things. Yeah, incredible. I read that last year, and then I was like, okay, can't read any more Nigerian stuff. It's not set in Lagos, actually. It's set in Ibadan, I think. Isn't it? Set in Ibadan. Anyway, so I am not reading anything by contemporary Nigerian writers while I write this one.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for writing the book. It's such a lovely one. So I'm keen to know your take on the categorization of your book when you walk into a bookstore, particularly in the West, right? Kehinde Fadipe. It's likely that they will just put it like in an African section, even though it's contemporary, you know, fiction or romance, right? I saw a movie recently, American Fiction, where an author, a character in the movie was really frustrated because his Black writer was frustrated because his book was placed in the wrong category. You know, so do you feel such frustration to say, yeah, it's contemporary fiction, it's romance? Why should it be in like in an African section?
I haven't seen it in an African section. It's always been in fiction under F, which is not a bad place to be. There's some great writers in F, so I'm very happy to be there. So yes, so far just fiction. It's not a romance, although that is a thread in the book. I mean, it's just I'm annoyed when I go in the bookshop and it's not there. So I'm happy that it's there. But so far that's been fine. It's a great film though, American Fiction. So I do understand what you're alluding to. Something that's really interesting last year was that I noted that it really wasn't on many Black British book lists. So I was like, huh, interesting. Maybe because I don't live in the UK, maybe because it's set somewhere else. So I do think regionally, like people place you based on where the book is set, you know. I'm not a Singaporean writer, but the book is set in Singapore. So maybe people are a little bit confused as to like whose story this is, or I don't know.
Would you feel frustrated if it's lumping like a African literary fiction section when it's contemporary fiction, and you think it would exclude you from reaching some audiences?
Honestly, no, because first of all, I'd be flattered if it enters the literature because it's not. But no, I don't. That doesn't really bother me as much. It doesn't bother me. You know, I'm an African writer. They're African characters. I'm very open and very relaxed about categorization, I guess you might say. If people are reading it and they're interested in it, I think I can't take credit for the book cover. It's a beautiful book cover, and it weaves, you know, some of our traditional fabric with some Singaporean symbolism, and that's really ultimately what I'm trying to do.
Hi, Kehinde. I wanted to refer to your earlier comment about about not being a literary writer and having to come to terms with it. And I think it's a very important thing as a writer to understand this is what I do and this is the space in which I maneuver. And how do you cope when people look at you and say, oh, but aren't you trying to be?
Aren't I trying to be?
To be whatever genre they think you should be, as opposed to the genre that you know you are.
Not that I've experienced that really. No, I don't. I mean, maybe I just haven't been around long enough, but I haven't really experienced. I mean, specifically like online or in interviews or.
Okay, I'll give you an example. I've written children's books, and people have said to me, "Oh, when are you going to write a real book?" Okay, and I'm like, okay, but children's books is what I write. But people feel that certain books are real books and other books are not real books. So how do you, for instance, cope with when they put you in a box and that's not the box that you want to be in?
I think, okay, I understand. Thank you. I think this will be a really interesting question to answer after my second book, because I think that's the sticking point is how much space are you allowed to maybe explore a different story or different themes. I don't know how much I can say about the second book, to be honest, because like I said, it's the first draft and we're kind of going back and forth a little bit. But you know, it's not going to be the same as this book. So do you have to keep repeating the same thing? I don't know. It's still focused on women, you know.
At this sort of stage history, but I think it depends on how you. Sorry. I think it depends on how you start out. So if you fix yourself into a box, it might be harder to come out of the box. Whether if you're just like, hey, I'm doing this today and tomorrow I might do this, people will perceive you to just be a writer, right? Rather than I'm this specific writer that writes about these specific topics. And people are different. So you do have some writers that don't stray from, you know, crime is what I do. Romance is what I do. But I think you're getting some like millennial writers who are just like, yeah, today I wrote a fiction book. And I'm going to talk about like the Emma Gannon lady I wrote. Her first book was a fiction book, and then I think her last two books were nonfiction. And she's writing another book, so she's just been moving through, and it's all related to her wider sphere, which is interesting. But I think there is space to move, and I don't know, Roving Heights, if you see this here with your authors that you represent, if people are feeling like they've started somewhere and they can't move to another genre. Is that, I don't know much about, do you get authors moving genres? Some. Yeah, okay, yeah, so it depends, yeah. So do we have any more questions? Oh, we have a question from online. Is this it? Oh, let's get the one here first and then me.
Thank you, Bosede Afolabi. Very nice book, thank you. So honestly, when I first started reading it, I struggled with the descriptiveness. I just felt, I mean, I read a lot. I can't write to save my life. So, but I read a lot. And some parts just seem to, it was just a bit too descriptive. In a lot
Going
of,
on too long.
So, but as time went on, you know, the characters got me. And I remember clearly my sister saying, I thought you said you didn't like this book. Meanwhile, every time you're putting it, you know, and reading, and I actually couldn't put it down. I finished and I really enjoyed the characters. I didn't like the fact that there was this male savior. but I think that was one of the things that I was a bit negative about at the beginning, but I really did enjoy it, and I think it was a great book. So there was one part at the end that, told me, yes, this is why you talked about, I haven't actually dug it, although don't worry, it won't be, I know, it won't be a spoiler. It won't be a spoiler. So it had to do with you talking about someone who said in a last photo they had seen, somebody's hand was cupped around the small hard bulge of their belly. And I thought, how do you notice in a photo, how do you know by looking at a photo that the bulge was hard?
Sorry, I don't know what bit this is. Sorry, what bit?
Sorry?
I don't know what.
Okay, why don't I tell you after so I don't spoil it?
Okay.
But so the descriptiveness was just my although there's nothing wrong with that. I mean that's a style of writing, but I just realized that regardless, I really enjoyed the characters and the way you told the stories, and you put them in different chapters, and they talked about each other. So I mean, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to congratulate the author. I feel very proud of you, and I think that is being sentimental, but I'm really proud of you. Actually, writing is in the family. You have an auntie that has written a couple of books, and I wish you all the successes in future writing. This one has already been a success. I pray that you have more successes. The one thing I would like to ask you is for future potential writers, authors, what kind of difficulties, if they encounter, they should not allow to put them off continuing to, to try to be a writer. And the second one is, how were you able to cope with the family as a writer? Thank you.
Thank you. So what potential future obstacles they shouldn't allow to stop them? I mean, I think it depends on the environment. Some environments are more challenging than others, definitely. One would probably just be like the drudgery of having to keep going maybe you don't write every day, but day after day, week, month, it takes a long time, and it can feel like you're not getting that the instant gratification that you can get from other things. So to maybe accept that is part of the process. I think you have to also enjoy your own company, because you're going to spend a lot of your time on your own. I had to learn about the publishing industry, so maybe to not be daunted about that, because I didn't have any connections in the publishing industry. I didn't know anyone, there was no friend of a friend that knew an editor or anything like that. So YouTube was my friend. I Googled everything. I went into bookshops. I looked at the back of books to see where writers thank their agents, their publishers, just to start noting who was who and what kind of books are they publishing. So I do feel like the process has become a little bit more egalitarian, more open, and you don't need to have a huge platform and millions of followers, or so to not maybe look at other writers that even if they haven't published a book, they seem to be this big writer with this big platform and all these, just to not look at any of that. All I know is fiction. I don't know anything else. My Substack isn't even really that good. So with fiction, I think, as we've seen tonight, everyone has different responses to the same book. You can't please everybody. People are not going to like certain aspects of your book, and they might enjoy other things. So I think you just have to really love writing and reading. So it's okay to be a nerd. It's okay to be a bookworm. That's what we are, and that's great. So that would be my. So sorry, I can't remember the second question. Family. Oh yes, family. Those children. Yeah. Well, I mean, they love the fact that I write, but they were very young when I started. So I would write early in the morning before I went to work, usually around 5:30, which meant going to bed when they went to bed, which is actually really key because kids go to bed early and then you stay up late and try and catch up on all the things you missed while they were awake. So I had to like prioritize that. I have had a helper in Singapore, so people do have nannies here, so it is possible with help or with family. And I worked on wrote on the weekends, in the evenings, holidays. I think at some point it just became a compulsion. It became, some part of my life. Yes, part of my routine, but also like probably therapeutic as well. Even going through ups and downs, I knew there was always this book, this story, these characters. That it wasn't that I was working with lots of people, focusing on the goal. The writing was the goal. So other than working with my editors, the best part of the process was just writing the book, especially once I hit that fifth, sixth draft and I knew what it was becoming. There came a point where I thought, even if no one ever reads this, this is like, I'm enjoying this. So how did I, managing the family and the children. Writing was it just became, I call this book like my third child. They call it like their younger sibling. And they were very involved in the title, in choosing the title, and they got very fed up with how long it was taking because like my son thought it should be like the colors of the flag, a Singapore flag and the Nigerian, like just really not very helpful. And then I don't know, I just think anything that is your passion is valid, and we should cherish that as much as other aspects of ourselves, including being a mother. So
Thank you. It's very, very lovely. So, okay. It's gonna one last question because we've got somebody online. So this is the final in-person question.
Can you talk a bit about the cover? You said you can't take credit for it. So how does that work?
The American publishers had a designer. The British publishers had a designer as well. They are under the same umbrella publisher. They're both under Hachette. So we did work closely together, but it was meant to be two different covers since it was two different titles. And the British publishers came up with their own design first, actually. And it was a picture of a Black woman on a boat. You could see the water. It was just very summery. It was very much a summer book. It gave me like W.H. Smith vibes. I could see it in W.H. Smith. It was nice. It was good. But then when the American sent this, and she sent an email where she said, when it was revealed to everyone in the publishers, there was like an audible gasp, and they knew that they had like a great cover. So when the British publishers saw this, they were like, can we use your cover as well? So yeah, it was beautiful. We had conversations probably for about 3 months where I sent like mood boards and just visual ideas, but my ideas were closer to what the British editor brought, just in terms of like the theme of summer. It came out last summer. So I really can't take credit. I think she's an incredible artist, Sarah Congdon. And so what she's done is, apart from burnt orange being my favorite color, which she didn't know actually, she's got like the Ankara print, but in it you've got the Singapore lion, which is their symbol, sort of weaved into it. And then the paperback, the American paperback colors are a little bit different, but this is for the rest of the world. So yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful cover.
That's a really simple question. Thank you, Kehinde. It's a beautiful cover. What's it called in America?
The sun sets in Singapore.
Oh, lovely.
They really wanted the word Singapore in the title.
Yeah, that's a really nice title as well, actually. So yes, so we have a question from our guests who have joined us online. So Madam Kofo Atijon says, thanks, Kehinde, great book. So this is asking a question really on behalf of the book club. As a book club, I'm sure we identify with the chapters on the book club, so the book club and the book. Incidentally, we have read both Homecoming and Americana. Can you share some tips for a successful book club? That's one. And two, one of the themes in the book is women supporting women. Could you share your thoughts on this, both in the context of your novel and in real life? What lessons can we as a women's club take from these experiences to enhance our own support systems and empower each other effectively? It's a power one for you to end on. Thank you. Thank you.
So I've never been in a book club before. No, I've never been in a book club, and I've always wanted to be in a book club. I would meet people at work who were in a book club, and I'd love to join, but sometimes they've come from a different country and their book club is back at home, or it's people they went to university with. So they all know each other. And I always found that book clubs can sometimes be a bit cliquey, and I never had time to start my own. So I don't know if I can give advice for a good book club. I just wrote like my fictitious book club of how I imagined the characters to be, and like the Nana character, for example, who's Ghanaian, is like very controlling. And I really enjoyed writing her. And I also really enjoyed writing about the books that they banter about, and that the books that they argue about which books they should read and the reasons why they should or shouldn't read them. I really enjoyed those scenes. And then women supporting women. I mean, definitely when you live abroad and there are not many Nigerians, like when you go through anything in life, like you realize how important it is to have a support system, which many people take for granted. Like if you live in your home country or somewhere where you have extended friends or family. And I think like somewhere in like Singapore, there's a lot of turnover. So people do leave quite a lot, but some people, the ones that do stay, we do kind of forge quite strong friendships with people that are very, very different from you. You know, different races, different backgrounds, completely different. So yeah, I think my second book has a little bit more teeth, I'm afraid. So it's not so much women supporting women as women who don't support each other. I think this one is a little gentler, because the women do eventually come together. But yeah, I don't know if we'll be having this conversation after the second one. The second one's a little.
We'll check back in on the second book. So thank you, Madam Kofi Atijon, for asking that question. I hope some of it was answered. And I think that's we're gonna call it a day and maybe get some books signed. I'm gonna get mine signed first. And some pictures. So thank you very much, Kehinde, and thank you very much everybody else for joining us.